Elon Musk walked into the interview room with a cool confidence. But what the audience didn't know was that evening, it was the famous host Bryant Palmer who would be taking the stage with a series of unexpected questions. It all started with an email invitation to the Bryant Palmer Show. The subject line was as simple as many other invitations Musk had received over the years. He had already turned down invitations from talk shows, news shows, and tech panels. But Bryant Palmer was so different that it was hard to ignore. Palmer's show was not only one of the top shows on television, it was known for its sophisticated blend of humor, controversy, and cutting interviews. Millions of viewers tuned in not only for the famous guests but also for Palmer's willingness to push boundaries, challenge, and sometimes embarrass his interviewees with his sharp questions. Musk was hesitant at first. His PR team carefully considered the invitation a rare opportunity to reach millions of viewers. Musk wasn't fazed by the spotlight, but he was curious. Would Palmer turn an interview into a dramatic performance, pushing him out of his comfort zone? Musk, however, was never one to back down from a challenge. On the day of the interview, Musk showed up at a modern, glass-walled studio in Los Angeles. The space was green and quiet, but no less bustling with the distant sounds of backstage chatter. A production assistant handed him a bottle of water and quietly disappeared. Meanwhile, Musk checked his watch. It was only 10 minutes until the interview officially began. Across the room, a large screen played a continuous replay of memorable moments from Palmer's previous interviews, excerpts from conversations with political leaders, Hollywood actors, and high-profile CEOs. Some laughed nervously, some got caught up in heated arguments, and others were subjected to Palmer's merciless banter. Musk smiled slightly. He'd done enough interviews to recognize the tricks and twists of the show. The question lingered. How far would Bryant Palmer push Musk in this conversation? The call from the door for Mr. Musk in 5 minutes added to the suspense. He adjusted the sleeves of his black jacket, then walked toward the stage with the composure of someone who had faced countless challenges, from daring rocket launches to mid-air factory collapses to catastrophic financial crises. And in that moment, the audience knew they were about to witness a conversation unlike anything they'd ever seen, a clash of the razor-sharp minds and unyielding spirits of Elon Musk and Bryant Palmer. The studio was packed with hundreds of people, from die-hard fans to skeptics, to those just curious to see what the show was about to do tonight. The modern circular stage, surrounded by bright LED panels, highlighted a large table with 2 chairs, one for Bryant Palmer and one for Elon Musk. As Musk entered, Bryant Palmer glanced up, flashed a mischievous smile, and stood up to shake hands. The two sat down. The audience fell silent as the theme music played. The lights gradually dimmed, leaving only the silhouettes of the 2 men on stage. Palmer turned to the camera, his voice warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest, the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, the one and only Elon Musk." Applause broke out, mixed with curious whispers. Palmer leaned toward Musk, twirled the pen in his hand, and asked, "Elon, people call you a genius, a visionary. Some say you are changing the world, while others say you are crazy. So what do you think?" Musk smiled slightly, replied, "I think history will decide." Palmer nodded, his eyes sharpening once more. "But tonight, we're going to explore something more interesting than history." The atmosphere on stage suddenly became tense and excited, the beginning of a dialogue that was full of surprises and challenged all boundaries. Palmer leaned toward Musk, his eyes sharp and his lips sardonic. "Elon, you have built rockets, electric cars, and even implanted chips in monkeys' brains. Some would say you are playing God." Musk chuckled, his eyes sparkling with confidence. "I would say if I were playing God, I would at least make sure my rockets don't explode." The audience laughed loudly, but Palmer did not stop. He leaned closer, his voice growing sharper. "But let's be honest, you have more money than an entire country, and people worship you as some kind of prophet. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should slow down before I become the next Bond villain?" Laughter erupted again, mixed with a hint of contemplation. Musk nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the audience before replying, "If I were a Bond villain, I would at least have a secret lair now. But unfortunately, I still live in a $50,000 house in Texas." The audience chuckled again, but Palmer did not let go. He flipped through the cue cards in his hand, pretending to search for something, then tapped. Speaking of that house, didn't you just fire most of the management staff at X? Musk's expression did not change. He replied calmly, "We had to make some adjustments." There were adjustments. Palmer smirked, his eyes teasing. That's a fancy way to say, putting people out of work right before the holidays. The atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. Musk, used to harsh questions, calmly replied, "I assume you're talking about the San Francisco office." Palmer shrugged, continuing in a sharpened tone. "The reports say people cried." "Elon cried? You have billions in the bank. Is that really necessary?" Musk exhaled softly, his gaze unwavering. "I think you know, running a company isn't about keeping people happy. It's about keeping it alive. X was losing $4 million a day." Palmer shook his head, his smile still there. "You have to be tough, be a billionaire, and make all those sacrifices." Shy laughter mingled with the silence of the audience. Musk didn't flinch, his gaze still steady. "There's a difference." The moment seemed to hang in the tense, sharp air of the conversation, as Palmer sensed a small gap in Musk's words. A sign that, even in a world of bold ideas, there were still fragments of humanity. Musk turned his head to look at the crowd, where the murmurs turned to a solemn silence. "You hear people are tough," Palmer said, his eyes flashing with defiance. "The guy owns a private jet, takes cars into space, a scene that could only happen in the wildest dreams of normal people." A few chuckles rang out, mixed with conflicting murmurs from the audience. Musk was silent for a moment, then leaned forward slowly, his eyes meeting Palmer's. "Do you want to have a real conversation, Bryant, or are you just here to put on a show?" The air in the room suddenly tightened. The audience fell silent. Even Palmer blinked for a moment, but quickly recovered with his signature smile. "Oh, I love a good conversation, Elon, but I also love the truth. And the truth is, people say you're erratic making reckless decisions." Musk raised his eyebrows, smiling wryly. "Oh, it lost billions of dollars before I took over, and now it's making money. That doesn't sound like chaos to me." Palmer laughed, then turned to the audience. "But let's talk about what people really care about. Do we have any Tesla owners in the crowd?" A few hands went up. Palmer grinned. "Good, you guys believe in self-driving?" Cheers and hesitations filled the air. Palmer turned back to Musk. "Some people say that, despite lawsuits, even deaths, you keep pushing it like it's the future. Do you ever feel responsible when something goes wrong?" Musk tapped his fingers on the table and replied, "You know, Bryant, we can talk about any car company and find an accident, but don't ask the Ford CEO if he feels responsible when someone crashes a Mustang." Palmer chuckled. "To be fair, but Ford doesn't promise full autonomy, do you?" Musk smiled slightly. "No, and we're not there yet. That's why we're still in the testing phase." Palmer sighed theatrically. "Okay, let's move on. Neuralink brain chip. What happens when hackers break in, or when the government decides they don't want to turn humans into robots?" A few people in the audience laughed nervously, while Musk paused for a moment, then gently replied, "Bryant, maybe you've been watching too many movies." Laughter broke out again, but Palmer didn't back down. He tapped his cue card on the table, his smile widening, as if he was enjoying every moment of the confrontation. "Go for it, Elon. You can't tell me you don't see the risk. You want to put chips in everyone's brain, automate every car on the road, control every internet satellite? And at what point do we start calling that power?" Amid the nervous laughter and the tension that permeated the room, Musk's gaze sharpened. He tapped the last finger on the table, not in a rebuttal, but as a challenging invitation to a deeper conversation, one where fantasy and reality collide, and where real power lies not just in technology, but in the responsibility of those who control it. Musk tilted his head, his expression unreadable. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze thoughtful as if to say, "You think I'm trying to control people?" Palmer spread his arms, his voice echoing around the studio. "I think when a man has an influence on social media, space travel, transportation, artificial intelligence, and now the human brain, it naturally raises some interesting questions." The audience murmured, some nodded, others seemed hesitant. Musk let the moment hang, then leaned forward slowly. I think people should ask questions. Skepticism is healthy, but the idea that I'm sitting in a control room, rubbing my hands together, is a little ridiculous. Palmer chuckled, continuing with a defiant tone. You mentioned one of my projects, Ex Machina, which sounds pretty ominous. Musk chuckled, his eyes mischievous. Actually, it's XI, but close. Palmer waved, then turned to the audience in a deep voice. Okay, but let's talk about something you can't easily dismiss. If anyone in the crowd has heard about the racial discrimination lawsuit against Tesla, raise your hand. A few hands went up, while others remained silent. Musk's jaw didn't tighten, his expression didn't change, but there was a glint of deep thought in his eyes. Palmer continued, his voice sharpening. There have been reports that your employees have been vilified, discriminated against, and made to work in unsafe environments. And that's happening right here in your company. So how does a guy who wants to put humanity on Mars do it? Let it happen right here on Earth. A murmur spread across the studio, some leaning forward, others listening intently to every word. Musk kept his voice steady as he replied, You're talking about a problem that affects every major company in America, and when we saw it, we took action. Palmer nodded, smiling fairly. Yeah, it's just business as usual. Musk exhaled softly. I'm saying that's not all Tesla is, and it's not something we're condoning. But if you want to talk about lawsuits, let's talk about your network. At that moment, Palmer blinked for a second, then leaned forward, his voice sharpening. Sorry, Musk, but you work for a network that's been sued for spreading misinformation. The tension in the studio grew, each word a bullet in the audience's mind, as the two men went head-to-head in a conversation not just about technology and business, but about responsibility and the future of humanity. Palmer was blunt. You sit in that chair, appealing to corporate greed, but your show runs ads from pharmaceutical corporations, billion-dollar banks, and defense contractors. This is no longer a joke. The audience cheered, the tension building. Palmer chuckled, his voice low. I'm not the one cutting you off. You don't directly make billion-dollar deals behind closed doors, don't take orders from executives, don't profit from division. There was a long silence. Palmer opened his mouth but couldn't speak. Musk calmly replied, You want to talk about power? Talk about your power. You sit here pretending to be the voice of the people, but your paycheck comes from the same corporation, and when you push too hard, you don't get a job. The audience fell into confusion. Some applauded, some just stared. Palmer forced a laugh. Now you're turning it around for me. Musk shrugged. I thought you liked the truth. For the first time that night, Palmer was caught off guard. He shuffled his cue cards, trying to regain control, but something had changed. Musk just looked at him, his gaze unwavering. Then Palmer cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair, a sign that his control was slipping. Okay, Palmer forced a grin. You had your chance, but be real, Elon. You like to play the underdog, the misunderstood genius, the billionaire fraudster fighting the system. Musk leaned forward, lowering his voice enough to sound conspiratorial. But it's not just branding. A man worth nearly $200 billion isn't fighting the system. He is the system. Musk softened. Of course I am. Palmer smiled faintly. The richest man in the world. You buy companies when they annoy you. You joke about free speech, but honestly, you run X like a personal playground. You decide who speaks and who keeps quiet. Musk's face doesn't change, but the temperature in the room spikes. The energy is suddenly heavy, and the air is charged with something unsaid. Palmer doesn't stop, flips another card. You're friends with influencers. You, Peter Thiel, the Saudi investors. You and them. Do you want to talk about your Bryant friends? The words aren't loud, they're not sharp, but they hit. Palmer blinks. Excuse me? Musk's voice is calm. Your funders, your CEOs, your political donors, they decide what you're allowed to say. Make sure you don't cross the line. The audience stirs. Palmer chuckles. Oh, now you're making this a conspiracy. Come on, Elon. Musk answers straight. There's no conspiracy, just a fact. When I make a decision, Everyone knows where it's coming from. Palmer opens her mouth, but Musk cuts her off. I build things that people see. They work or they don't if I fail. The whole world watches, while you only pretend to challenge authority from behind the scenes. Palmer's face twitches for a moment. The audience is silent. Some nod, some applaud. Palmer quickly says, people say you're erratic, pushing dangerous ideas, scaring your employees. Do you care about the consequences? Musk leans back. You're quiet. Palmer opens his mouth again, but Musk continues. You make a living stirring up outrage, but you don't solve problems. When the cameras stop rolling, what have you done? Palmer shifts in his seat. Musk adds, I get it. Your job is to make people angry so that the ad revenue keeps flowing. But make no mistake, that's not what makes a difference. The audience senses it. Some applaud, others fall silent. Palmer runs his hand through his hair, grinning. I think we just had a class on deviation. Musk smiles and the audience applauds. Palmer glances at the producers off stage. They were watching carefully. Palmer's control was slipping, and Musk knew it. But the real reaction was yet to come. Palmer adjusted his tie, tried to keep a smile, but the atmosphere had changed. His usual confidence and control were slipping through his fingers. He was not used to losing. The audience fell silent. Some leaned in to watch, others exchanged glances, unsure of what was going on. This wasn't just a late-night interview. This was the real deal. Palmer glanced at his cue cards but couldn't read them. He needed to turn things around quickly. So Elon, Palmer began, his voice returning to normal. You came here to talk about innovation, about the future. Let's end on a positive note. What's your next big project? It's going to save humanity. Musk looked at the audience, leaned back and replied, there's a lot of things moving. I'm pushing AI, space travel, sustainable energy. But the biggest challenge isn't technology, it's trust. Palmer raised an eyebrow. Musk nodded. People don't trust institutions anymore. Governments, the media, and they're right. A murmur ran through the crowd. Palmer chuckled. And you think you're the solution? Musk shook his head. No, I believe in honesty. People are tired of being manipulated. Palmer scoffed. So you're saying I'm the problem now? Musk tilted his head slightly. I think you're part of an industry that's profitable, divided, angry, and distracted. You ask me if I'm responsible for what I create? Palmer blinked. There was no answer. There was a long, thick silence. Then a round of applause, one after another. Palmer's jaw clenched, but he covered it with a forced smile. This must have been an interesting conversation, he said, swiveling in his chair. Musk nodded. I agree. The studio lights flared, the cameras still rolling. Palmer licked his lips, forcing himself to continue. Okay, everyone, I'll give it to Elon Musk. Applause and murmurs filled the room. Musk stood up, shook Palmer's hand, and walked off stage, leaving Bryant Palmer still sitting there, trying to process what had just happened. But the storm had only just begun. When the cameras stopped rolling, the tension in the studio was still there, thick as the muted post-show chatter. Producers, assistants, and camera operators moved in an eerie silence. Palmer ripped off his headphones and threw them on the table. His face was still plastered with a forced smile, but his eyes darted toward the producer. What the hell is going on, he muttered. The producer didn't answer, busy with his phone. Neither did half the studio. Less than 5 minutes into the interview, before it was officially live, someone was recording. The clip went viral. Twitter apologized to X. The headlines wrote themselves. Elon Musk turned the tables on Bryant Palmer, directly criticizing the hypocrisy of television. As soon as he left the stage, Musk's phone rang continuously. His mentions skyrocketed. A clip posted by a small account with a few thousand followers attracted hundreds of thousands of views. Comments poured in for every sentence. Elon had just picked Palmer apart, like an engineer breaking a bad prototype. This wasn't an interview, it was an execution. Palmer wasn't ready. Thoughts and debates erupted. Some praised Musk's response as a calm classroom. Others said Palmer, with her self-deprecating tactics, had trapped herself. The debate was not about words, but about meaning. One side argued that Musk was destructive, refused to play by the rules, and was not afraid to call out hypocrisy. On the other side, critics accused Musk of dodging responsibility, of diverting the conversation without addressing ethical concerns. But beyond the hot air, something deeper was happening. People began to ask, were interviews being framed in Palmer's way? Were stories being crafted to manipulate public opinion? In a tense conference room, Palmer faced the folded-armed executives. A woman in a Navy uniform, after putting down her phone, acknowledged that this was the highest engagement of the year. Palmer just smiled wryly. It was just a news cycle that would be off for a few days. But the commentary wasn't just about Musk. It was about the media, about whether powerful people were truly accountable or just playing the part. Meanwhile, Musk sat in his quiet office, sipping coffee, scrolling through a post on X by a regular person. The scariest thing wasn't what he said, but how the media controlled the narrative. Musk chuckled, knowing that the moment wouldn't last forever, with just a crack in the facade, and the audience would never see the puppet show the same way again. The real lesson wasn't about Musk or Palmer, or who won or lost. It was about perception. People like Palmer have built careers on controlling the narrative, shaping public opinion. But for the first time, the audience saw through it. In a world flooded with information, the real power lies not in who speaks loudest, but in who listens. Do you think this is just another viral moment or something bigger? Leave a comment, like and subscribe because the important conversations are just beginning.